Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the WIOA Wednesday webinars, where today we'll be discussing the supplemental guidance to the governor's guidelines regarding memorandums of understanding, or MOUs, and those negotiations. We have staff from Kerber, Eck & Breckel here today to present the information. We also have staff and administrators from the core partners who will be able to answer questions. As always, we will have an open session for questions over the telephone, but that will come later. By all means, utilize the chat pod on the left side of your screen to submit questions during the presentation. If you have not already received the PowerPoint presentation being used today, you can download that document from the files pod. We did upload that or update that today, so if you have yesterday's version, you might want to take a look at today's version for those changes. And with that, I will turn this over to Skip Hedger, who will begin the presentation.
Good morning. The focus of today's webinar, as Mark said, is on the supplemental guidance to the governor's guidelines. The main purpose of this webinar is to get your questions about requirements for MOUs for 2016 and beyond. I'm going to make a short presentation, which you have, related to the supplemental guidance. But at the beginning, I just want to acknowledge the confusion that I know exists locally around the requirements for PY16, while at the same time saying that that confusion is due to two primary factors. The first is a strong commitment from the state of Illinois to be in full compliance with WIOA on July 1st of 2016. And that led to an intensive effort to assure that in a number of ways, including by publishing guidelines from the governor that are required under WIOA. So that's one factor. The second is that, wouldn't you know it, but in late January, the feds issued some additional clarification that essentially suspended the requirements for a major portion of WIOA, namely the infrastructure funding requirements for comprehensive one-stop centers, from July 1 of 2016 until July 1 of 2017. So that change caused the need to reevaluate requirements for PY16, which led to the issuance of the supplemental guidance, which I'm going to briefly go through today before we get to your questions. We should have ample time for your questions. If we do run out of time, there will be a Q&A posted in short order following this webinar, probably tomorrow, I'm guessing. And if there are questions that we don't have time for or you think of afterwards, you should route those questions back through the designated representative for each required partner, and I think those are known, and if not, we can identify those people. So now on to the webinar. Let me just briefly provide an overview of what I'm going to cover in this brief presentation, a little background and context, some of which I've already given. Then I'm going to review the supplemental guidance that applies to PY 2016 only, which is state fiscal year 17. Briefly going to review the major components of revision 1 to the governor's guidelines, which came at the same time the supplemental guidance was issued. And this revision 1 included some forms and templates that I'm going to identify and talk about briefly, and then recap the timelines that apply for PY16, and following that we'll have your questions. In terms of the background and context to begin with, as I mentioned before, the original guidelines from the governor were issued in December of 2015. And the purposes of those guidelines are shown on this slide, but primarily guidelines from the governor are required under WIOA. And so those were issued in 2017 to not only comply with the 2015 in December, not only to comply with the WIOA requirement, but also to convey important information related to the negotiation of local MOUs and the importance of optimizing service quality and value throughout the workforce delivery system in Illinois. And then obviously the guidelines also establish ground rules and timelines for MOU negotiations. Then, as I mentioned before, on January 28th, the feds announced the delay of the infrastructure funding requirements. And what that means is that all local areas now have until July 1 of 2017 to agree upon the costs for infrastructure following the new WIOA requirements. So that was a major shift, obviously, in everybody's thinking. The second thing, which is not really related, is sort of unrelated to the change by the at the federal level, is that because of legitimate concerns that have been expressed about what local areas are being asked to do in a fairly short period of time, the IWIB decided to extend the original timelines in the as described in the governor's guidelines to provide to slide those timelines back beyond the ones that were originally specified in the governor's guidelines. And again, I say this was because of legitimate concerns that were being expressed throughout the state around the time being allowed to do what local areas needed to do. The supplemental guidance, I'll mention again that I'm going to go through, applies to PY 2016 only, and also as part of the governor's guidelines, there was the first revision, as part of the supplemental guidance, came the first revision of the original governor's guidelines. So just to review then the supplemental guidance, the main components of it. The first is to provide an alternative timeline for MOU negotiations and the reports that go along with that apply for PY 2016 state fiscal year 17 only. So there is now a unique set of timeline requirements associated with the upcoming program year. Second is to provide additional information regarding negotiation of shared costs that apply only during PY 16 state fiscal year 17, owing to the extension of the effective date of infrastructure requirements coming at the federal level. The third aspect is to identify the governor's guidelines talk at various places about an individual designated by the governor, and that individual, at least for the first program year, is Mike Baker from the Department of Commerce. And then the final purpose of the supplemental guidance was to issue the second revision or the first revision to the governor's guidelines. Just to review on this slide, this alternative timeline that applies only for PY 16. I won't mention the timelines that were in the original governor's guidelines, just to suffice it to say that these were slid back basically 60 days from the ones originally specified. So in terms of the major activities leading up to the submission of MOUs for program year 16 at the beginning of it by the first of the year, the first of the new program year, the alternative timelines specified that the local MOU negotiation period, which was originally described as being a 90-day period, although that's a soft requirement because local areas are obviously free to begin that anytime they wish. But according to the revised guidelines, that should have begun by March 1st of 2016. Local preliminary budgets that reflect infrastructure costs and one-stop service delivery system costs are required to be submitted to Mike Baker, the individual designated by the governor, by the end of this month, by April 30th. Designated prescribed period, I guess, for negotiation MOUs would then come to an end of May 31st. As everyone undoubtedly knows, there's an outcome report that is required that to be submitted to Mike that identifies the outcome from your negotiations, which basically is to report whether the local partners agreed in their negotiation with the local workforce investment board, innovation board, or not, and if not, what the reasons for not being able to reach consensus were. For areas for which consensus was not reached, there is a 45-day remediation period that would begin on June 1st and last through the middle of July of 2016, with local areas asked to submit their signed MOU by July 15th of 2016. So that's the revised timeline, the alternative timeline under the supplemental guidance. This next slide shows is the first of two that describes the change that the federal government made with regard to the extended effective date for the infrastructure cost funding requirements that are described in WIOA in Section 121H, as indicated in the answer to this question. So the question essentially says, do the infrastructure costs apply in PY16? And the answer is no, but they will apply. The requirements of Section 121H of WIOA and the regulations expanding on the law will take effect on July 1st of 2017. The next slide really builds upon the first by saying that in the event that there is not local agreement in PY16, that the state funding mechanism is not available during PY16, but instead will become available on July 1st of 2017. So what the two items of clarification coming from the federal level did were to effectively suspend the requirements of Section 121H of WIOA, which speaks to infrastructure cost funding. Then moving on, the specific guidance that is included in the supplemental guidance is listed on this slide. First is that negotiation of local cost sharing must be part of the local MOU negotiations for PY16 as they were under WIA, as the local cost sharing was negotiated under WIA. Second is that all local partners are required to contribute their agreed upon fair share of local service delivery system costs for PY16 through their cash or accepted in kind contributions, and this is not a new requirement. It is required under WIA that there was a specific requirement that there be that the partners in local one-stop delivery systems share costs. That specific language under WIA I will read to you. It's also included in Attachment 2 of the supplemental guidance, and Section 662-270 of WIA asks the question, how are the costs of providing services through the one-stop delivery system and the operating costs of the system to be funded? And the answer under WIA is that the MOU must describe the particular funding arrangements for services and operating costs and each partner must contribute a fair share of the operating costs of the one-stop delivery system proportionate to the use of the system. That's not new language for you or a new requirement. That's the requirement as it existed under WIOA. Then thirdly, local partners that have contributed their proportionate share of local service delivery system costs under WIOA in the past should continue to make those contributions for PY 16. Draft budgets are due to Mike Baker, as I mentioned before, by April 30th of 2016 using a new spreadsheet that was part of revision 1 to the governor's guidelines. And I will add at this point that even if you have not yet reached consensus in local areas as to how the costs will be shared, we're still asking that preliminary budgets that reflect the costs, absent an allocation of those costs among the partners, still be submitted by April 30th to Mike Baker. And then finally, the same processes, and this comes pretty much from the federal clarification, the same process that were used under WIOA to resolve disputes should also continue to be used under WIOA for PY 16 only. I'm going to stop at this point and ask for any questions you have about
your microphone has been turned on
regarding the supplemental guidance that applies to PY 16 only. In the next segment of the presentation, I'm going to cover briefly the major elements of revision 1 to the governor's guidelines. But for now, I would stop and ask for questions.
Okay, Skip, we've got a couple that came in on the chat pod. I think the telephone lines are open up, so once we get through these couple of questions, if you want to ask your question over the telephone, you can do that. The first one is, can you define the calculation of fair share?
Well, within the context of WIOA, which is the requirement that would be applied for PY 2016, that's a complex determination that's made locally. Most everybody knows that under WIOA, the federal government published an authoritative financial management tag that is a couple 300 pages long that gets into the methodologies by which fair share is determined. But basically, it's rooted in federal cost allocation principles and is a function of costs proportionate to the benefits received. That's a simple way of saying it, but it's a very involved process for any entity to, when you're talking about proportionate share, to define what that means. I just pointed out that in the glossary that accompanied the governor's guidelines, there is a specific definition of proportionate share, and this definition would be one that would be more applicable for PY 17 when specific requirements kick in, namely that the governor is required pursuant to the infrastructure funding requirements to determine each required partner's proportionate share. But I'll read to you that definition. The definition of proportionate share that will apply for PY 17 and beyond is an amount determined by the governor that represents a required partner's portion of comprehensive one-stop infrastructure costs statewide for purposes of the state infrastructure funding mechanism. This amount is determined through a reasonable cost allocation methodology that assigns costs to required partners in proportion to the relative benefits received. So the basic principle of cost allocation remains. The one I mentioned that would be found in the financial management tag under WIOA that would apply for PY 17 is the same principle, and that is costs in proportion to benefit received that is also part of WIOA and the infrastructure mechanism that will kick in on July 1st of 2017.
To build on that, on the proportionate share, is that based on your service area, or is it based on on the funding?
Well, again, I have to answer that in two parts: PY16 versus PY17. I'll take the PY17 part of that question first. And again, that would assume that Section 121H of the law and the regulations that support that, the final regulations, are in effect. And what the governor's guidelines say is that proportionate share will be determined by FTEs. So beginning in PY17, each partner's proportionate share will be determined by the relative FTEs to the number of FTEs as a whole that support workforce delivery in the state of Illinois. That determination was made for a variety of reasons, but that's what the answer would be for PY 17 and beyond. For PY16, again, I would just refer you back to what you did under WIOA, which is what the feds are saying, and that would include reference back to the financial management tag, which incidentally is also, I think, is anticipated to continue under WIOA because it's specifically mentioned in the regulations as a resource for cost sharing. But for proportionate share for PY16, there really is no governor's determination of what that is, and it's a local determination of what proportionate share is, and would come through the negotiations that happen locally.
Okay. To build off of that, if the local areas and the partners can't agree on cost sharing for one stop and didn't have a mechanism in the past, how do they finalize this cost sharing?
Well, as I said before, the preliminary budget comes in, whether you've agreed or not. When May 31st comes and it's the time for you to submit your outcome report, you're going to submit a report that says you didn't agree, and you're going to explain the reasons for that you didn't agree on that outcome report. And then, you know, all I can say is whatever processes that were used under WIOA would be used to resolve that conflict. So there are requirements related to impasse and policies related to that would presumably apply. But for the immediate future, the answer is to submit the preliminary budget by April 30th, whether you've agreed or not, and to submit the outcome report by May 31st. If that outcome report reflects no consensus, then a 45-day period of remediation will kick in, which means a state-level team would try to facilitate agreement and consensus around the issues that are preventing the local agreement. So that would be the process, and so the hope coming out of that process is that, number one, that through everyone's best efforts, that local agreement can be reached. Number two, if that can't happen, that through the extraordinary efforts of a state-level team to try to work through the issues, that agreement would come from that. If at the end of that process that's not possible, then you know, there are under WIOA impasse procedures that presumably would apply.
To build off of that, and I think what you said earlier was in PY17, is it an expectation that they will use FTEs, full-time employment numbers, or can they use something else? An example someone has asked is using a fair share or proportionate based on the number of clients served.
Yeah, well, let me just say this: that under the governor's guidelines, FTEs is the basis the governor is going to use to determine proportionate share at a state level. FTEs is not the only way costs can be allocated. Under the Uniform Administrative Standards, there are a variety of methods that can be employed as the basis for allocating costs, and local areas have the ability to choose from among the methodologies that are available, as long as they are in compliance with the Uniform Administrative Standards. Having said that, I think there's a strong encouragement at the state level to use FTEs for reasons of uniformity and standardization and technical assistance, but no, it's not required. There is no strict requirement that FTEs be the basis of allocation that partners use locally, but I can say this, that if there is no agreement reached locally, the governor is going to use FTEs to decide what every partner's proportionate share is.
Okay, I think we've heard the next comment or question. In discussions in the past, local areas, Title 1B specifically, have maybe taken on more share than would be expected of those costs. Can that be expected going forward into PY17 as they work on those new MOUs? Will it be allowed?
Well, so that's a PY17 question?
Yes, it's specific.
You know, I think PY17 is a new moment in how one-stop infrastructure costs and delivery systems, local one-stop delivery system costs are funded, because both the law and the regulations, the interim, the proposed regulations are unambiguous, and they require that all required partners make contributions to both the infrastructure costs and to shared systems costs. That's there's much stronger language in WIOA. I believe the expectation, certainly at a federal level, is there, and I think at a state level as well. One of the things that I think everybody's beginning to wait to see what the final regulations look like and what additional clarification they provide. But pending the issuance of final regulations, I would only say that there are some pretty strong direction coming out of DOL, at least. I can't speak for education. That is pretty much saying that each partner's contributions toward one-stop costs or shared systems costs are to be cash contributions, and that's certainly true for infrastructure costs. That's what we're picking up from the regional office, at least, and they are, I think, in dialogue with the national office about that. So in short, that was a long answer to a short question, and the short answer is I think the expectation beginning in PY17 is that there will be real true cost sharing across from the required partners, all of them, because they're all required by law to do that unambiguously.
Okay, I want to get back to the telephone lines. Is there anyone on the telephone that wants to ask a question via that method? And if your question has come in through the chat pod, be assured we will get to that. We're just trying to prioritize these along with the discussion in the presentation. So we just thought we would give time for those on the phone if they wanted to ask.
Yeah, Mark?
Yes.
It's Jeff up in McHenry County. I just want to clarify that there's real dollars tied to infrastructure costs, and if so, then why do we have the line in there for in-kind staffing under the infrastructure on the spreadsheet?
The regulations clearly permit in-kind contributions for under the local infrastructure cost funding mechanism. And that's why the line is on there. There's explicit language in the regulation that says that under the local funding mechanism, which means that local partners agree with the board in negotiations as to how costs are going to be shared, that in-kind contributions is a legitimate way to contribute a partner's fair share. This is, as I say, one area in which I think, one of many areas in which I think everyone has their eye on for any additional guidance or clarification that comes in the final regulation, but the explicit language in the interim regulation is that in-kind contributions under the local mechanism are allowable.
Just get this, Jeff, again. In-kind for material, in-kind for staffing. There's a big difference there.
There is. For, Jeff, are you asking a PY 17 or 16 question? Because I got two different answers for you.
Well, we should be looking at PY 17, but I understand we have to live under PY 16.
Yeah. Okay. Then I'll give you the PY 17 answer. There is this is where the conversation with the regional and national office has provided some, I guess, guidance preliminary to the issuance of the final regulation, even though they're encouraging waiting until the final regulation comes out to make any final decisions. But as I mentioned before, what we're getting is that for infrastructure costs, in-kind contributions made through contribution of staff are not allowable for infrastructure costs. That's what they're saying. There's an alternative line of thinking that that those contributions are allowable, provided they meet certain criteria. But that's where it stands now. It comes down to an interpretation issue, and the final clarity around that is probably pending the issuance of the final regulation and any clarity that comes there. And then there will be some decisions to be made. I, for one, and this is just me speaking, think that am convinced that there is a legitimate way that in-kind contributions of personnel can be used to offset infrastructure costs, provided two criteria are met. One is that all the other partners agree, and if you don't, then there would be no in-kind contribution. The second is the nature of it offsets the cash contribution that a partner would otherwise have to make. Because we're talking about bills here, we're talking about lease payments, we're talking about utilities, whatever it is, cash items. And so there is an alternative, without getting into all the details of it, there is an alternative way of looking at whether in-kind contributions of staff are permissible or not. But the latest clarification we have coming from the national office is that for infrastructure costs, they're saying no, they're not allowable, pending again the language in the final regulation.
Okay, and then someone's asking, can you make that same response for this year? As far as in-kind, can they utilize in-kind staff?
They can do whatever was allowable under WIOA and whatever is permissible under the financial management tag, which incidentally permits contributions of in-kind staff for non-personnel costs. That is an allowable methodology under the tag, which is one of the reasons why I say there is an alternative way of thinking that this is that's permissible. So I would just really refer you to whatever you did under WIOA and also what is allowable under the financial management tag, and obviously must also be allowable under the uniform administrative requirements.
Okay, the next question, and Levon has responded to this, but we'll repeat it, and I think there's a little bit more that could be added. in both PY 16 and 17, it would be different. Does every adult education and Perkins provider need to deliver career services at the one-stop, even if they did not under WIA agreement? So under 16, you're indicating business as usual, so if they didn't in the past, they can go about their business in the same fashion. In 16?
Well, no, just to draw a distinction here, the only requirement that got shifted for 16 is infrastructure cost requirement. Service delivery requirements did not change for July 1 of 2016. So as a required partner under WIOA, their adult ed services must be made available during all normal working hours at every comprehensive one-stop center. How that happens is negotiated locally, whether it's one or multiple adult ed providers that do it. So those service delivery requirements have not changed at all for PY16. It's only the funding of infrastructure costs.
Okay, that's a good clarification.
May I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, Levon.
Levon, what I was addressing in Joanne's question was the issue of provider versus program. There could be several providers in an area for either adult ed or post-secondary Perkins. My point was that the providers, each one, don't have to be. What they have to do is come together as a program and make sure that adult ed services via the adult ed program are appropriately delivered. And that's where I was coming from.
Okay, yeah, and to clarify that is that only the Title IB and Wagner-Pizer are these individual, or individuals have to be present physically at the one-stops. All the other services need to be available however method is chosen, whether that be technology or staff, presence can be utilized, and in many cases I imagine that will happen with some of the partners. But you just need to make sure you're clear in that only certain programs have to have a physical presence. All services and the programs of the provider or of the core partners have to be available in one way or another.
Right, and that's why it's said appropriately.
Yeah.
And let me add to that, in reading the documentation, that is clarified to say if services are provided by an individual that is not on site, the services need to be delivered in a way as if they were on site, and it's real-time help. So
yeah, and under the requirements as described in the governor's guidelines and elsewhere, it must meet the direct linkage requirement, which essentially, as Mike Baker just said, is that alternative services made available through technology must be available on demand and as needed, as though an in-person staff were providing that information or service. So it's one of the many areas in which the requirements under WIOA strengthened considerably, and so if those partners that decide they're going to make services available via technology have a higher bar to meet under WIOA about what that means.
Okay, a quick response to another one is who submits the budgets, and that is the actual local boards that need to submit these, or their appointed staff?
Under the governor's guidelines, the local Workforce Innovation Board designates an individual to take the lead, but the local board is the one that negotiates the MOUs and the budgets, and so presumably the submission would come from the local board chair or if appropriate, from the individual who the chair designated to be in the lead for the negotiation of MOUs. And again, those go into Mike Baker at Commerce.
Okay, now you've been involved in a lot of these discussions, so I think, I don't know that we have an answer to this next one, but maybe you can add some insight. We know there's going to be a lot of data sharing requirements, and having a common database is maybe one of those methods, and it's a major cost. Is there potential or discussions on how that's going to be handled? Will the state be participating in the building and cost of that?
The new IT department would be involved in that.
Yeah, I don't have a lot, Mark, on that, only to say that there are ongoing conversations at the state level around this big topic of data integration and sharing, and and it's not it's been an obstacle, frankly, for many years. I think there's a desire to migrate to something that's more universal, but there are obstacles to doing that, and I think it's fair to say that that there is ongoing work to try to make it in Illinois be the best it can be. But I'm not really involved. We're not really involved in that. I don't know if somebody else has information in my view.
Yeah, this is Mike at Commerce. Just a couple of thoughts on that. The governor has created a new, essentially, IT department for the state that's going to be looking at issues such as this from a statewide perspective. So I'm sure that group will be involved in any kind of data integration effort, as they go through their process. But I would just like to give everyone some free advice to not use the lack of a uniform, integrated system as a rationale for not sharing data. Yeah, that would be ideal, but that's not what we have. But for us to provide enhanced customer services and better services to businesses, we need to work through the issues of sharing data between programs at the state, regional, and local levels so that issues and customers don't fall through the cracks. So we're here to help everyone with that as that process goes along and we get further into WIOA. But that's a challenge we all have, but we need to work through that if we want to provide the best customer service possible.
Okay, I think one last question, then we'll move through the presentation and get back to any additional questions at the end. As part of those discussions, again, Skip or Mike, has it been discussed as to who will be collecting these costs?
Ultimately, the board is responsible.
Locally, the question is who is.
I would assume their question is local, but
yeah. So under the governor's guidelines, the local workforce and innovation board chair designates an individual to negotiate both the MOU and the costs, and so presumably, and there are procedures and processes described in the governor's guidelines related to that, but presumably the individual each local workforce innovation board chair designates would be the one that would be collecting, determining what the costs are. And again, inside the guidelines are some steps that are general steps that are indicated as starting points to begin to collect information on what costs are. And then subsequently to that is how those costs will be shared among the partners.
okay, I think we'll go ahead and proceed on, and we will open up the telephone lines again at the end, as well as always as we proceed here, you can put your questions or comments in the chat pod.
And I'm going to move through this next section pretty rapidly, so we'll get back to your questions in just a few short minutes. But what I want to do is spend a little bit of time on the second part of the supplemental guidance, which was related to issuing the first revision to the governor's guidelines. And this was done for a variety of, the revisions were made for a variety of reasons, including additional clarity that emerged from the point that the guidelines were originally issued. But as this slide that's up now shows, the purpose shows the purposes of the revision, and there are three shown on this slide. The first is to provide standard templates and additional resources that are intended to help local areas in their processes of successfully negotiating MOUs and shared costs. So there is an MOU template document that is part of the revision 1. And where it says required in parentheses, what that means is that the expectation and requirement in the state of Illinois is that all MOUs are organized the same way with the same section numbers describing the same content. The content can be different, but the organization as described in the template is required. The second is example MOU language, and this is optional. So for each of those sections that are described in the MOU template, there is some example language for you to, really as a starting point, for you to locally, for the board and the individual the board chair designates, to look at, to have some starting point language for each section of the MOU. The third tool is a local service matrix for service delivery. There is a local service matrix was always envisioned in the original governor's guidelines, but there was not a specific template or requirement for that local service matrix. So now there is a specific matrix. Just as a bit of reminder and context, the governor's guidelines provides a service matrix that reflects the general thinking at the state level around the services that are going to be provided in local areas and the methods of service delivery used. But that's, again, is just a starting point for local negotiations. What this local service matrix does is using that state level matrix that was included and is included in the governor's guidelines is to reflect how you're actually going to, those services that are actually going to be made available locally in comprehensive one-stop centers and the methods of service delivery that are actually going to be used in a local one-stop center, because that's not going to be uniform from center to center around the state. So what the local service matrix does is provide local areas and local boards with the tool to reflect how services in comprehensive one-stops in that local area are actually going to be accessed and the methods of delivery. The next tool, there was an original non-Excel spreadsheet of a budget format in the original guidelines, but under revision 1, there's now a super Excel spreadsheet that does a number of things that are intended to make the process of at least documenting budgets in local workforce areas easier. And finally, there's a spreadsheet as part of the budget spreadsheet on FTE calculations so that it is clear the number of FTEs that are being committed in each local area toward the services under WIOA. So those are the new templates and resources. The second major purpose was to clarify the use of in-kind contributions and the requirements that have to be met, and I'll just say it again that that's in flux. And what the final answer is going to be depends on what happens. One thing is clear, to me at least, and that is for PY16, in-kind contributions of staff or any in-kind contribution are permissible. It is very unclear to me whether that flexibility is going to exist for PY17 and after until the clarification happens. And then there were also some other minor technical revisions in the revision 1. The next slide is just an example of one section of the template that, as it appears, and an example of the example language associated with that particular section of the template. So you've got two things. You've got the template, which is the order which prescribes the order in which the MOUs must be prepared, and then the example language for you to use or not to use to describe or to complete that section of an MOU. So this is just one example of that. The next slide shows the local service matrix that I mentioned, and so this particular slide indicates the 13 career services that are across the top, I believe. It's so small to read, it's hard to tell. And then down the side are all the partner programs, and this is simply a way that in conjunction with the preparation of an MOU, board and local partner decisions about service delivery are documented and incorporated into the MOU through this local service matrix. The next slide is the new Excel budget format, and there are two main parts to the budget format as presented. One, the top part has to do with infrastructure costs, and the bottom part has to do with local one-stop delivery system costs. There is a, going back to the question that was raised earlier about FTEs being required, this spreadsheet is structured to provide flexibility for both FTEs to be the basis of cost allocation, as well as for a local determination of another allowable basis for cost allocation. The spreadsheet is set up to accommodate both, but that's a picture of the budget Excel spreadsheet. The next slide shows is a fuzzy picture of the FTE calculations tab on the worksheet, and what this basically does is just document the FTEs that are being provided by partners in order to permit customers to access services at the comprehensive one-stop delivery or one-stop center. And there's a differentiation made on this tab on the spreadsheet between on-site FTEs and off-site FTEs, and without getting into the complication of two different types of off-site FTEs, suffice it to say that the distinction really doesn't matter, that in terms of cost allocation, because whether on-site or off-site, the FTEs that are being dedicated to service delivery, at least insofar as the governor's determinations are made going forward in PY17, will be the basis for cost allocation. In other words, an off-site counts the same as an on-site FTE in terms of that calculation. Then finally is an example of the outcome report that again is due to Mike Baker as the individual designated by the governor, due by May 31st. And this basically what local board chairs are required to do is to submit this outcome report that says we either did agree at the top or you failed to reach consensus is the next box down. And if the report is that there was a failure to reach consensus locally, despite everyone's best efforts, to describe the major reasons for failure to reach agreement. As I said earlier, based on these reported outcomes, there is those outcomes for which negotiations were not successful. There would be an additional attempt made to facilitate agreement locally through a remediation period that would involve a state-level team attempting to help resolve whatever the issues are that prevented local partners and the local board from agreeing on how to do this. So that's just a facsimile of the report that's to be submitted. Again, it's to be submitted to Mike Baker by May 31st. And the period for trying to resolve issues would begin immediately after that. So with that, we'd return back to the questions that you have about, it can be anything, about these additional forms and templates.
Your microphone has been turned on.
Came with revision 1 to the governor's guidelines, or about MOU negotiations, really anything pertaining to what you're trying to do locally to reach agreement on service delivery and to reflect that agreement in MOUs that are to be submitted by the first of the next program year.
Okay, we have one somewhat holdover question for the data sharing agreements. Are those going to be handled at the local level, the state level, or both?
Well, I think Mike's answer was good. I think both is the short answer, but understanding that there are ongoing conversations at the state to try and improve data sharing agreements and data integration and systems integration and all that stuff, there should also be corresponding conversations going on locally about how data that now exists can be used and shared to improve customer service and to improve performance. So I think the answer is both. It's being worked on and continue to be worked on at the state level, but it needs to also be part of the conversation locally to do the best that can be done with the information and tools that are available now to maximize customer service delivery and outcomes.
Yeah, let me add to that, Skip. I think that certainly the state program staff could be covered through a statewide data sharing agreement between departments. However, you all will have different local providers and organizations that are participating with you that don't fit well into a statewide data sharing agreement. So as Skip said, it's going to be a bit of a hybrid approach.
I apologize, we lost our screen here. I hit something that I shouldn't have, I guess. So, but we don't have any other additional pages to show. So we're awaiting additional questions through the chat pod. If you have would like to ask your question or make a comment on the telephone, all of the lines are unmuted again, so please utilize that. I'm getting ready to paste the website where you can go to find the recording of this. As always, we record these and place them on the Illinois WorkNet WIOA implementation site. And so if somebody was unable to attend but wants to gather this information, they can always go there and see not only this webinar but all of the past webinars we've been doing for the last 9 months or so.
Yeah, Mark, let me add in, this is Mike again. Want to give a shout out to Laura Dahm, who created the FTE spreadsheet. As you look at that and get into it, the first tab on that sheet will help you figure out how the FTEs are allocated. But then as you go into the later tabs, it is set up to automatically populate those fields once you have the data elements on the cost in place. So if you're using the FTE approach, the spreadsheet is already set up to do at least 75, if not more % of the heavy lifting for you. So shout out to Laura for putting that together.
Yes,
yeah, that spreadsheet is great. We've been using that. This is Al Kuhlman, IDS in Peoria. And we've gone through this process and we still have a little modification to do, but we've kind of rolled it all up. We're getting close to, having a finalized FTE cost. My question is, IDES has the lease with CMS for our building. The Title 1B partner is going to be moving into our building here this summer, and so IDES pays the lease on the building. How about the collection of the charges from all of the partners? We come up with an FTE cost, and it's, let's say it's $10,000 per FTE. Then some of the organizations either can't afford that, or because of the state's budget crisis, they don't have any money, and then some will have money. But the collection of all of that falls on the shoulders of whom? And then there's going to be a lot more collected than is due in the rent. The building is, let's say, $300,000, but the whole thing rolls up to about $700,000 when you have the salaries of the frontline staff who will be organizing things up front. You have advertising costs. You have replacements for computers that you build in, internet cost. All of that is rolled up, so you have this huge number that you're going to collect for, but all of that isn't due now. So who handles all those funds? And I guess that's the end of my question. It's a long one, but sorry.
Yeah, this is Skip Hedger, Al. It's a good question, and the first part of the question as to who handles that is whoever the leaseholder is, which in your case would be you. This has been the topic of conversation and I'm drawing a blank on the name of the person within IDES who is in charge of finance and budget, but she is I'm not sure if costs have been shared in Peoria before under WIA, but we've been told non-equivocally that IDES knows how to do that. That there are under WIA there were non-IDES partners who made cash contributions to IDES as the leaseholder to support one-stop delivery system costs, and internally there are procedures within IDES worked out for those for that cash to be received and applied as needed. I think her name was Linda DeMore, maybe.
Right, Linda DeMore. She's our CFO in Chicago.
Yeah. So I would suggest that you contact her because she was pretty clear that that you have it worked out internally and did have it worked out internally under WIA as to how that works. How that works specifically, I don't know, but Linda has said that's been worked out.
Okay, that's good to know. That hadn't been shared with me yet, so I appeared ignorant, I guess, here. But
no, it's a great question, and I'm glad you raised it.
Okay, the next question, asking for a little bit more clarification on the staff FTEs, and the example is if you refer a person for a GED class, does the off-site FTE include the instructor or just the person handling the referral?
Well, I'm trying to fit that question into the context, and this context, and that context is the required partners are required to provide career services, the ones that are applicable. So if that is a career service, which I don't believe the GED instruction is a career service, the referral would be a career service, so that piece of it would be applicable as a FTE, but the actual instruction would not, unless the locally the partner providing the GED instruction had determined that it was obligated to do that and make that service available under WIOA. And I know that's a vague answer, but each, I guess what I'm saying is each required partner has to look at its scope of services, scope of the services that are authorized by its program, and decide which of those are applicable under WIOA. So there is some determination made locally, but the short answer, I think, is that certainly from a career services standpoint, it would be the referral piece of the FTE that would apply.
Let me have a quick sidebar with Skip.
Well, while they're discussing that, we want to make sure that everyone is aware. We do have some contact information, websites, things of that nature here on the last page. So we've already shared the WIOA implementation portal where all the documents and updates are. There's also a website for other frequently asked questions. Information will be uploaded to that following this webinar once we get that information put into a document and uploaded. And we want to make sure as you look at your PowerPoint, if you had one of the earlier versions, some of these links, you had an email for Mike Baker on that. That's not who you should be contacting for this. Am I correct?
I'm sorry.
Did we not change your email off here?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they submit them to me, but they submit them to me through the email address that's on the webinar.
Right. So utilize that. Just wanted to clarify that. So now, Skip, if you want to continue on.
Yeah, I just, Mike and I had a brief side conversation and in response to the GED question, And the clarification would be that if the GED instruction were provided on site at the one-stop center, then that FTE would be countable. I think I saw where Levon had a couple of questions she wanted
Yes, let's go ahead and move to Levon.
Oh, okay. They're kind of quick. They were just more clarification. Back on the FTE form when you talked about Type A and Type B off-site, I know you said you didn't want, but I'm going there. Okay, could you clarify or, because I think it's confusing to partners out in the field that may not work on this, like some other partners are more engaged. State-level partner, when they see that, it says state-level partner, I mean, clarify.
Sure, I'm sure Laura's happy to do that.
You know, I mean, if there's a little
Yeah.
note or something you could just,
Yeah.
or if you don't need to say state level, because we're really talking about the partners at the local level.
Well, I think part of the distinction is that it is possible that the service access via technology could happen at a state level, not locally.
Okay, okay,
Like,
all right.
a partner could
maybe
choose
that
to
needs
do
to be,
that. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, that was just one, and then, okay, that's, got it. And then on the form where everyone has to, where it has to be signed, whether they had infrastructure cost issues or not, my only question there is, that is, I want to clarify, that's for PY 16 and 17.
No, well, you're talking about the outcome report?
That's the outcome report.
Yeah. It's really the second, if you did not agree, the first says for
Right.
non-infrastructure costs. For infrastructure costs, that distinction doesn't apply for PY 16. So
Okay.
for PY 16, it would only be, we didn't agree, and here are the reasons. For PY 17 and beyond,
Right.
there's a distinction between agreement for infrastructure cost reasons, agreement for non-infrastructure cost reasons.
Right.
But that
Right.
distinction wouldn't apply for PY 16.
Okay, is there any way to, because I don't have the slide up in front of me anymore, you
Yeah.
know, they moved on, and for some reason those, anyway, is there some way to explain that? Or put a disclaimer on that? I
Yeah.
mean, frankly,
Yeah.
I mean, probably everybody can figure out where I'm going, but we've got, you know, everybody's got partners that
Yeah.
don't have to, you
Yeah.
know, that are stuck in this
Yeah.
shifting transition period, and then it looks like those partners are being obstructionists,
We'll put this,
or,
we'll put-
you know, and they're not really, you know.
Yeah.
And so I'm a little concerned that whoever the partner is for this particular year until everything fully kicks in, you know, listing them without some sort of a disclaimer about the year we're in going forward,
Yeah.
that goes to the governor's office.
Yeah.
Sure, that could be putting extra pressure on people, but the other hand, you know, to do something. But on the other hand, I think it needs to be explained right on the form itself.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what we'll do at a minimum, Levon, is we'll put that up on the Q&A to make it very clear that that section of the form
Okay.
does not need to be completed. And this is a good, practical, concrete example of the confusion that I referenced in the beginning. That's caused that everybody knows is I think there's rampant confusion. But
I'm good at bringing up questions about rentals.
No, but this is a good example of where the disconnect between the state's eagerness to be in compliance and issue governor's guidelines, followed by the Fed saying, well, we're going to delay, causes confusion. Because this form works great if the infrastructure cost funding requirements were in effect in PY16, but they're not. So at a minimum, we will put this up on the Q&A that makes it very clear that that section doesn't have to be that box doesn't have to be checked.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Is that all, Levon? Would you?
For now.
Okay. All right. I was just wanting to move to another one if you were finished with your questions.
I'm done.
In the MOU template, it refers to the one-stop operator in Section 5. How do they answer that at this time when they haven't procured the operator?
Yeah, Section 5 has to do with referral, I think. And so part of the response is that every partner needs to describe how referrals, cross-program referrals, are going to work. But I also understand that the operator is also part of that question, and the regulations postpone the effective date of having a competitively procured operator for the one-stop until June 30th of 2017. So it is, it is a function of ultimately there are going to be competitively procured operators, and some are in some local areas are in the process of doing that now. So if you have an operator, then I think the question applies. If you don't, if you have not yet procured an operator, then I think there would be some value in including in the FTEs, because this is also a regulatory requirement, that the progress be documented in terms of steps you're taking to move toward having a competitively procured operator in place by June 30th of 2017. So it's a little bit of a there's a little bit of ambiguity about it, because ultimately the operator requirement is in effect. For this MOU, it's not in effect. You may or may not have it, and so I think if you don't have it, the content that would be helpful in the MOU would be to describe, I guess, the best thinking about the role of the operator locally and the progress being made to put one in place.
Okay, and then another one is, with the spreadsheet, contributions are grouped or tallied into three broad categories: materials, staffing, and cash. Where are the specific detailed contributions described? Is this in the MOU narrative or in the notes section on the bottom of the spreadsheet? And first reply to that was provided, I think, by Laura, was the top portion of the spreadsheet determines the partner's contribution or proportionate share, and then the three broad categories would be how they, as partners, intend to contribute their proportionate share.
Yeah, and I think that's correct. That's correct. So there's a differentiation between the costs. The costs are identified on the spreadsheet, total costs. Then the allocation of those costs across the partners is identified. And then, so that would result in an amount that goes to each partner, and then under that is how each partner will make that contribution, either through materials costs or cash or in kind. So those are broad descriptions of the contributions that would be made. Behind the spreadsheet, presumably, would be whatever work papers or additional detail that's not in the spreadsheet, such as if the partners agree that a contribution is going to one partner's contribution is going to be made by in-kind staff, presumably who that in-kind staff person is or the function that they perform would be documented somewhere. It's just not required to be collected, I don't believe, on the budget template. But you would need to have that to get to the budget template. You would need to know which ones. And so.
Okay.
Describe it in the narrative, I'm told.
Right.
At this time, does anyone else have any questions over the telephone? We've answered all of the questions that have been presented in the chat pod. So we'll give you another minute or so to speak up over the telephone if you would like to. I would like to thank, before we get to that, go ahead and thank all of the individuals that have participated today, both in asking the questions, especially to the staff of Kerber, F. and Breckel for presenting and answering the questions. Our staff here at Office of Employment Training, especially Mike and Laura, who have responded to many of these comments and questions. We do not have a topic for next week at this time. That does not mean we aren't going to have a webinar. We are still trying to finalize what our next few weeks of webinars will be, and if we can determine a topic for next week in the next day or two, we will go ahead and do that. Otherwise, just look for email notification from Christy Jones, as always, on the upcoming webinar schedule. And Skip, go ahead.
Yeah, just one final comment. about questions and answers. As I indicated earlier, there will be a Q&A document going on the portal FAQ section, and we'll get that up as soon as possible. In the meantime, there are going to continue to be questions that come up, and the protocol that we're asking everybody to follow for those questions is if you're an adult ed partner, then you need to ask that question to the individual who's been designated for the adult ed program, who is going to provide the first level of response. If you're an IDES local office manager or regional administrator, there's a person within IDES that's been identified as the central point of contact for questions. So we would ask that your questions first go to the designated individual for each required partner. Those are all coming to KEB because we're compiling them and we're taking those to the interagency work group at their monthly meetings to recommend, to identify issues, talk about solutions to them, and also recommend additional clarification that needs to be posted to the Q&A. So please follow the protocol of first asking your questions to the individual that's been designated by each program to be the central point for questions.
Excuse me, this is Al Coleman. For IDES, is that Linda DeMore then, or is no?
I don't remember, Al, who it is off the top of my head. Do you know?
No, we don't know, but Linda DeMore was just your contact for the budget question you asked earlier.
Right.
Right.
Janice Taylor Brown, maybe. We'll get that. I tell you what we'll do. We will post the individuals that have been designated by each partner. All the partners have been asked to communicate this information to local areas, but we'll put it up so that it's available to everybody.
Okay, great.
IDES have somebody on the webinar now.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's someone from IDES who's on the webinar that would have who is the central contact person for questions coming out of IDES. Anyway, we'll post it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we do have one more comment. Okay, they're just saying that Janice Taylor Brown is the person for IDS that should be contacted.
Okay, good.
Okay,
I'm glad we
great.
got that clarified. Yep.
Thank you.
Again, I think we've answered all of the questions today. I appreciate everyone's participation, and thank you for joining us. Goodbye.